Okay, well, let's do that for now. Let's go live. Let me know when we can start.
Okay, we are live.
Okay, this is the November 2nd, 2020 regular meeting of the Board of Estimate and Taxation. Madam Clerk, could you call the roll?
Mayor Railing, Mr. Abrams,
Here.
Ms. Brown,
Here.
Mr. Chairman Camacho,
Here.
The mayor's coming in now. He was on the public side. I just
Great.
promoted him to panelist.
okay. Mr. Frere,
Here.
Mr. Jelleret,
Here.
Mr. Kasimis,
I think he said he wasn't attending.
okay. You have 6 present, you have a quorum.
Okay.
Please note that I just joined. I don't know if you had me down.
We do have you
I
down.
saw you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. So we'll start off with approval of the minutes of the October 5th meeting. I was not there, so if anyone would like to make any corrections, additions, deletions. Is there a motion to consider the minutes?
So move.
Okay.
Can I just say one thing, Troy? If you could keep your phone muted at all times, and unless you like, even right now, we're getting feedback. It's coming from your phone, or try turning your volume down. Thank you.
Okay, so there was a motion to consider the minutes. Are there any changes to the minutes? All right. Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
So moved.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I abstain. The motion carries. The minutes of the October 5th, 2020 BET meeting are approved as prepared. Next item on the agenda is the I guess there's nothing on the special appropriations portion of the agenda. There are some items on the transfer agenda. That would be page 8. And these are items that, is this a Board of Education?
These are not the Board of Education at this.
Okay.
The first 2 items.
All right, Angela, do you want to go through those?
Yeah, sure. The first page are 2 transfers from contingency. The first one is to fund 25% of the security camera and fiber optic network extension to Norwalk Harbor. You may remember the last meeting on October 5th. This was approved as a special capital appropriation, but as it went to finance and claims, before it went to finance and claims, the bond council recommended that we fund this out of the operating budget because it's such a small amount. It doesn't make sense to go out for bonding for that amount. So you'll see later in the other items section that I'm asking you to reverse last month's approval of the special capital appropriation and instead fund this through contingency. And Karen is here again. Karen Delvecchio, head of IT, is here if you need to ask more detailed questions.
Okay. Shall we move the item prior to discussion? These are 2 transfer items. Do we have to move this, or can we just discuss it without a motion?
So it's better to move the item and then open it for discussion.
Okay, so let's. Is there a motion to move this item?
I'll move that.
All right, it's been moved. Is there any discussion?
So if I understand this, this is just a reclassification more than anything else.
Well, it's actually,
Yes, yeah.
and then we're going to reverse what was approved at last month's meeting, correct?
Yeah, so we approved it as
Correct.
capital appropriation last time. And so now we're just reversing it and
coming
taking
out
it
of
out of
operations.
operations instead, that's all.
Right, okay. So the items, shall we consider them both together?
Yes, I think so.
All right. And so the second item, the $40,000 is the same issue, or what's that issue about?
No, that is because of COVID, there was a delay. Last year, there was a special appropriation for the YMCA to take over the city building at 98 South Main. And because of COVID, so when we were preparing the 2021 operating budget, the maintenance of that building was taken out of the budget because it was assumed that the YMCA would be covering all maintenance. Now, because of that YMCA opening has been delayed, we need additional funds to continue the maintenance of that building. And I think Alan Lowe is on the call if you want to ask more questions specifically about that funding.
Alan, would you care to explain what the 40,000 specifically is for?
Yes, good evening. Actually, there's one more item later on coming up, which is a rollover. Bottom line is that every year, last couple of years, the building management department has been requesting money for the operating and maintenance and management of 98 South Main Street. And the city went off for RFP for a nonprofit group, excuse me, to manage the building, to take over the management of the building and run a community service program from that building. We received one proposal from the YMCA, and through negotiation and all, and common council approval, the council approved a relationship agreement with the Y to probably start the turnover of the building to them spring of 2020. Because of COVID, that process hasn't moved forward. And the problem is that last year when we prepared the budget, we only included $20,000 for miscellaneous stuff. But with the city to continue to operate the building, there's a cost to operating of the building. So the $40,000 specifically will cover our contract with Guardian Services to provide management services. We continue to use manage the building and do maintenance and repairs. And I think AmeriCare is still in there, and there's another group in there, which used to be the South Norwalk Community Center group, is still in there. So we have minimum number of tenants, but at the same time that there is a cost to operate the building. So again, there's we have requested another rollover $125,000 to pay for all the utilities and fire alarm maintenance and elevator maintenance and on and on.
Okay. Is there any other question?
Yeah, Ed Destroy. Just a quick question. I have no problem with this transfer, but is there any timing update on when the Y is going to try to move in there, or just waiting for next year with the COVID situation?
Sure.
Died down?
Yeah, basically it's that. We are waiting to see how, excuse me, my throat is really dry. We're waiting to see what COVID bring us. We are projecting potentially June 30th of the coming year is when there's a possibility that COVID may be under control a little better, and potentially they can start doing some planning. It's both there's a program side and development side of what the relationship with the city is going to be a long-term lease agreement. Meanwhile, I'm going to the Land Use and Building Management Committee of Common Council this Wednesday to consider an interim use of the building starting January 1st. So it's minimum programming, but even at that, we have no kind of fixed determining exactly what it is. It's some after-school program, but it all depends how school is going to operate in the springtime. So again, a lot of it is up in the air, but at the same time is that we believe that, well, the city, generally speaking, believe that some community service program during COVID. It's kind of essential to the community. So to the extent we can find program to support the community, it's something that we want to do is support. So we are looking for an interim agreement between the city and the Y for 6 months, starting January 1st to June 30th. And thereafter, hopefully, we can establish some establish the new permanent relationship with the Y.
So is there a lease? Is there a signed lease? And does that?
No,
lease
there is none.
Oh, there is none?
No, there's no signed lease yet. This is all drafted and it's been reviewed by both attorneys, both sides already. It's almost ready to execute, but the only problem is, again, COVID came about and the Y had to kind of reconfirm funding commitment and stuff. And they are still very committed to this project. But at the same time is that we don't know who's going to be using the building. So again, we're looking to do an interim agreement first for 6 months and thereafter to the full, I think it's a 30-year agreement.
Will the understanding be that the YMCA, if they are to be the tenant, will be largely responsible for the upkeep of the building?
For during the interim period?
Well, not in the interim, but long term.
Oh yeah, long term, it's their full maintenance and use responsibility and programming responsibility. The city responsibility will only be limited to infrastructure. Really, it's they are supposed. The plan is. I don't quote me on this. I think the negotiation been. I think it's about the Y is going to put in around the total project capital construction is about $4 million or $4.5 million that we have to raise. Part of it may be state funding. Part of it is their fundraising. And the city, I think, is looking to put $1 million into the whole relationship. So there is a major capital funding, renovate the building, so that we anticipate the infrastructure to be new after that. So the operating costs, they are fully responsible for all operating costs. And I think the city's responsibility is the long-term future repair and capital replacement. So I don't remember top of the head all the detailed negotiation, but generally speaking, the city would be out of the day-to-day maintenance operation of the building.
Okay. Are there any other questions? I think both items have been moved. Is there a vote to approve these transfers, 71,509 and 40,000?
So moved.
All right, so moved. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? The motion carries and the items are approved.
There are also 2 more pages of transfers. Those are to, during the 2021 budget, the wage increases were budgeted in contingency due to the contract negotiations. So the next 2 pages of transfers are to now fund all of the departmental wages budgets from contingency. And at the same time, if you look at this list, I have some transfers out of some of the wage accounts for some departments because I cleaned up where there have been movements of staff to other departments so that those budgets now correspond to all of the staff movements. So the total that is coming out of contingency for the contractual wage increases is 1.572 million, which with that transfer out of contingency and including the transfers that you just approved, there will be a balance in contingency of 949,940, just under $1 million left in contingency, which is consistent to the $1 million that is generally appropriated for contingency every year.
Okay. And will that million sort of fall into the fund balance then, or that 949?
No, that would stay. That's this current year's fund balance. So that's how much we have in fund balance for the 2021 fiscal.
It's this year's contingency. So it's a line item in the budget. If we don't touch it for the whole year, then it would go into fund balance.
Understood.
And Angela, just to reconfirm the 1.57, while it was in contingency, that wage increase number is consistent with what we had planned in contingency, so it's not above or below what we had planned in contingency for the salary negotiation?
No, it was not above what we had planned for contingency, and maybe Henry wants to speak to that more because he did an analysis for the personnel committee.
I think that we had guidelines from Ray Burney when we were doing the budget on what he anticipated for the wage increases. And the amount that was finally negotiated was a total that was less than what we had put into contingency.
Okay.
So putting it all in, we put it in contingency so that it wouldn't be so evident. We've now moved it so every department will have the proper authorization for their salaries and compensation lines. And we are left with about 950,000 in contingency for the last 9 months of this year, 8 months.
Thank you, and thanks for the clarification, Henry.
Sure. You're welcome.
There are any motions to approve that transfer? Or those transfers, I should say?
So moved.
So
Troy.
moved, Brown.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries and the items are approved. Thank you, Angela. Is there anything else on the city side? No, right? All right, there's nothing under the special capital appropriations agenda. So we move to other business. We have here the community services chief, a presentation. Lamont.
Hi, good evening. Good evening, Chair. Good evening, Mayor. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen, so I apologize for those that may be on the phone or unless you can see it. One moment. Can you see the presentation?
Yeah.
Great, fantastic. So good evening, board. The purpose of today is to share with you, this is more for information sharing, the transition of the grants, which was called the grants to outside agencies, that it will now be moved to the Community Services Department, which is the department that I lead. Just as a brief refresher, under the reorg under the Community Services, the programs or the departments that I oversee is the Fair Rent and Human Relations, the Human Services, the Library and Health Department. And you can see the other programs that are under the Human Services, both youth services and early childhood. And we have a direct relationship with Fair Housing and the municipal agent for the elderly, in which they serve Norwalk's low-income seniors for support services and case management. And then I circled on the left the direct connection with local nonprofits and social service agencies serving Norwalkers. And this will be an area that I will emphasize.
Lamont?
Yes.
You may want to advance the slide.
Slide 2.
Pardon?
You could switch to slide 2.
You can't see slide 2?
only have
No,
slide
you're
1.
on slide 1 and you have to advance it to the next one.
Well, it's 2 on my screen.
Okay, well,
What do you see now?
we only see slide 1.
Oh, bummer. I'm not sure what to do. Get them higher.
Slide 1 seems to be the only thing with a red box around it. So that's currently you only have.
If you're in presentation mode, we're not seeing presentation mode. Check that you're sharing the correct screen.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
So can you see the org chart?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay.
But you're not in presentation mode for some reason.
On the bottom, if you change it to presentation mode, there are some, in the orange banner, there are a couple of different choices. If you go to presentation mode, I think it'll be better.
How's that?
Same.
Lamont, you just want to choose the option on the top left that says from the beginning.
My expertise. What are you all seeing now?
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
I hope you see what I see.
That's better. Thank you.
So do you see the org chart I just changed to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All righty, thank you. Okay, so as I indicated, this is the org chart for the community services, fair rent and human relations, human services, the library, health department, and under human services, we also service the youth services program, early childhood. And then I circled the direct connection in local nonprofits and social service agencies, which I'll talk about regarding the specific transition of the outside grants to outside agency grants. And so I changed the slide. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I'll get a good rhythm now. Thank you. Thank you for your patience. So 1 year later, the Community Services Department were well positioned to identify the human service needs. Within this year, I've met with a variety of the nonprofits throughout the city of Norwalk. And this gives us an opportunity to deliver on an actionable item regarding establishing coordinated partnerships and efforts. And then as the city's Community Services Department, it gives us a bird's eye view to identify specifically in our city, what are those gaps in services? So we're talking with the nonprofits, we're understanding the services they provide, but most importantly, we're also understanding where are those gaps and where are those emerging needs and how we as a city can leverage resources to make a greater impact. And so I'll just move very briefly. You know, the department has a sense of what's going on in the city a year later. We bring together on average over 30, 40, 50, 60 social service and community-based organizations. That call consists every other Friday. We also have a deeper understanding of the knowledge of the needs of our community. And I think what's important for me is great insight in the perception of those services. In other words, there's a great service array here in the city, but what is the perspective of the residents? So we have access to Reddit to understand what those services are like. And then one of the big pieces, we want to continue to establish collaborations and partnerships. And that's been a pivotal component of our department, is bringing together the nonprofit human service community to kind of figure out how do we provide services in a way that's respectful, in a way that brings dignity, but most importantly, so that everyone has access to services. And then we continue to be aware of the trends, needs, and best practices. And so for those that, as a background for the outside grants, you know, the city of Norwalk dedicates resources to the nonprofit community. The finance department sends out applications. There's an ad hoc committee that reviews and grants fundings. And then the finance process administers the grants. And so for this budget year that we're in, we moved the grant line of Head Start. That's a federal Head Start program. And so that's a federal match that they provide services to low-income families for children under 5. And we also moved a line item for senior services, of course, again, providing services to our seniors, but also specifically to our low-income seniors. And so this budget year, the year that we're in, 2021, the outside grants allocated $538,235 to the nonprofit community. And so what I'm sharing with you is today that we are now moving into establishing the Community Services Grant Program. And that grant program will be operated and administered out of the Community Services Department. And, you know, I'm not going to read everything that's here, but similar, what's important is that we're changing the model, but we're using the same allocation. So I'm not here to ask for a budget increase. Okay, so I think that's important to know. But moving the $538,235 into the community service budget so that as a department, we can strategically think about how we are funding the social service and human service organizations here, but really with using a strategic approach around identifying what should those priorities be, where are those gaps in service, and how can the city play a role in supporting them. So we're moving from a one-time fiscal year model to what is called the rolling grant cycle. So with the allocated funds, organizations and nonprofits can apply similar to what the grant funding, but on a rolling cycle for support. The other piece that will be changed is that currently the existing outside grants program does not have a framework for accountability. So the current way we administer grants is there's an application, funding is dispersed, and that is it. So my department is well equipped to also create and design an effective system for holding those that receive funding through an accountability process. And that simply is designing metrics, performance measures to have the organizations that if they're receiving funding from the city, specifically tax dollars, we want to make sure that they're making impact and making sure that what they have originally set out to do, that they're serving our residents. And then I just listed some partners because, we're not doing this in the vacuum. It's important to look at research. It's important to look at data. Every 2 years, the city of Norwalk embarks on a community well-being index. We have the Norwalk Region Community Health Assessment. We're working with our partners over at Norwalk Acts, the Norwalk Community Food Report. So these reports are current and they help us identify what are those priorities based on data, based on needs. So as we think about funding and supporting the social service, human service array here in our city, we want to make sure that the funding streams and how we fund are geared to what the priorities are and what the data tells us. And so we are now in the process of looking at the model, designing the model, establish criteria and evaluation, performance measures. And I'm hoping, working with purchasing, to put this all online so we can take advantage of technology. And that is it. I went through it very quickly and briefly, but I'll entertain any questions if there's any questions.
Lamont, this is Sherry Brown. I have a question.
Sure.
I'm on the phone, so I'm not. Well, I can look at the report on my phone, but so, and it may be noted here in your report. So, what are some of the gaps that you're seeing that we have in Norwalk, and if any have been identified, how are you going to address it? And then the other thing is, who administers the Head Start program? Now, I know the Housing Authority had it for a minute after Neon shut down, but I'm not sure who's administering it now.
Out of Danbury, I always forget their name. Out of Danbury,
is it the CAP agency in Danbury? It's the CAP agency in Danbury.
No, Connecticut Western. I forget the former congressman is the executive director. Don, I see you nodding. Do you know the name?
Is that Congressman Murphy or something?
No, I don't.
Yeah, he was
former congressman.
What's that? He was the congressman about 10, 15 years ago, right?
Exactly. Yes.
You're not talking about Christopher Shays.
No. This was in the 5th congressional district, I think.
I
don't know who that is.
The Connecticut Institute. I just found it.
Okay, the Connecticut
Institute for Communities out of Danbury. They now hold the federal award for our Head Start, and we're required as a city to do a $500,000 federal match.
Mm-hmm. So it's a regional thing. So they handle it for the region, I guess, down here then, right?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
But specifically, the program they do here has to be only Norwalk residents.
Right. So what weaknesses have you, or gaps have you all identified here in the city in terms of social services, if any?
Sure. Obviously, you can't talk about this in the vacuum without talking about COVID. So one of the,
of course,
that's what I'm doing that every day. But one of the areas is that when I meet with my team, we're still seeing a lot of families struggling with basic needs. And when I talk about basic, I'm talking about people not having the funds to eat, people inability to pay their rent, individuals that are still trying to find work. And so I'm looking at the organizations that provide those services. But one of the shifts that I'm making is that as we think about funding those programs, I also want to know who they're partnering with, who they're collaborating with, and how we can leverage the city dollars so that when we do give money, they're not just relying on taxpayer dollars, they're also working on what their bottom line is, how they can sustain the activities that they're providing instead of always just waiting for the city to support and fund them. So that's a major.
So basically, I'm sure that COVID has probably magnified any challenges that were already present.
Most certainly, and if you see when we promote the food programs, that's all emanated out of my department. If you know, the large Connecticut food bank programs, the Andrews Field food site, that's all emanating out of our program. And we're giving about 2,000 to 3,000 boxes of food weekly.
But the upshot here is that the money that that a committee of the BET, along with the mayor, used to meet with these agencies, and you would consider their proposals in light of last year's proposals, and basically then recommend to the city what the allocation ought to be. At this point, you're taking that whole operation in-house because your department now has a bird's eye view of what the need is in the city. So it makes sense for you guys to do it in-house in light of the fact that the BET really didn't have any authority to allocate that money in any event, right?
That is correct. And I'm building relationships with the organization. So we know who's doing it well, and we know that who may need a little help. So we want to make sure we're funding high quality programs to serve our residents and our constituents.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Lamont, I had a quick question. Could you just talk a little bit about the difference? You allude to the fact that you're going to go to a rolling allocation methodology. What's different in that rolling allocation methodology than what we've been doing in the past?
Sure. So again, it's the same funding allocation. So presently, this past year, it's the fiscal year. So July 1, those that were approved, that whole allocation is dispersed. What I have recommended is do a rolling cycle because the needs change. Case in point, there's an example that I always use. The local homeless shelter received part-time funding for a homeless liaison. This would have been a good opportunity for the city to step in and partner with the state. If the state said, we will be able to fund a part-time position, city, can you pay an additional part-time? So now the city now has a full-time homeless case manager that is working through the city. So really looking at both the here and now, but also the opportunities change and the needs may change over the year. So we want to make sure that the resources are not just dispersed at a one-time shot, but looking at it more strategically from a longer continuum, how we fund programming.
So would that mean that you would hold back certain funds from being actually dispersed, depending on what you think is going to be a future need, maybe 2 quarters out?
That is correct. And we're looking at rolling out and approving funding on a quarterly basis.
Doesn't that make your job for budgeting for the entire year very, very difficult?
Well, Lamont, it also makes the job of the agencies that we're funding, it makes their job a little difficult too, because aren't they coming in at the beginning of their fiscal year for this type of funding?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
The agencies that we're funding or that we're supporting, wouldn't that make it difficult for them to plan as well because they have a fiscal year calendar or whatever fiscal year they have, they are planning for the next year. And so if we're doing it on a rolling basis, wouldn't that make their job difficult as well?
No, not necessarily, because our budget year is a fiscal. Some of theirs are annual, and then some of them are biannual. So it all depends. And I used to be a nonprofit manager. They're going to take the money whenever they can get it.
Well, that's a good point, because they're not funding one major position. They're funding their operation in general. Right?
Exactly.
I would just add to that, though. Would it also not make the agencies requesting the money more responsive, or you're holding their feet to the fire because you know that you're not going to give them money unless they perform what they've done in the last, let's say 2 quarters or something like that. So in essence, by doing it this rolling allocation, you're exerting a lot better control over how we're spending the city's money.
I couldn't say it even better. Most certainly, with the monitoring and the metrics and the reporting system that did not exist prior, I couldn't say it better.
It sounds like you've just gone to one of Henry's classes.
Right, any other
Very
questions?
good. Thank you, Lamont. Good.
Thank
Very
you,
good.
thank you.
Thanks very much.
Lamont,
Thank
one
you.
question to Troy. Did I see something in that you wanted us to be involved in the approvals of this when you do the approvals on a periodic basis?
No, I think, what I'm most certain to do is, biannually, I just lost my video, be certain to share, on a, maybe, twice a year to share how the money is being spent. But no, I wouldn't come to you all on a regular basis.
Okay.
Because you're going to ask for the full amount every year, every fiscal year. But you're going to, you're going to be allocating those funds on a rolling basis. Could be quarterly, could be
That is correct.
monthly, who knows?
But James, from a budget point of view, it's a line item for the year. He manages it. He looks at responsiveness and also holds back based on there might be different needs during the year. And at the end of the year, if the money isn't spent, I would expect a rollover that there's money to be spent. So for our budget year, the allocation for the year, when appropriated, should be the sufficient amount. But instead of spending it all in June or July, it's rolling throughout the year.
And he's also controlling it better.
Correct.
All right, any other questions? All right. Thank you, Lamont, for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your
Thank
time. Have
you.
a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lamont.
Thank you.
All right, next item is in the other business section is a reversal of the October 5th, 2020 authorizations or appropriations. This is what you were talking about earlier, Angela?
Yes, yes. This is because you approved the transfer from contingency to fund this project. I'd like to reverse the prior approval for the capital appropriation.
Okay, so the action requested reverse the approved special capital appropriation totaling $71,509 allocated to capital account number 09-21-5070-5777-C0793 to provide the required 2020 Department of Homeland Security Port Security FEMA grant 25% matching funds. This project will be funded by a request to transfer funds from the operating budget contingency account, which we have approved, to the IT department, the IT department's IT hardware account. That is what's being requested of us. Is there a motion to approve that?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The motion carries. The item is approved. Thank you, Angela, for that. We move to the Board of Ed. Mr. Hamilton.
Good evening. Maybe, why don't I start out by saying I know we have on the call Dr. Estrella, our superintendent, Barbara Meyer Mitchell, who is the chair of our finance board, and Kristen Karschmidt. I'll introduce the item, and then if the superintendent or our board member want to add anything, certainly invite them to do that. The item that is on your agenda, I actually believe you have a number of items that relate to the city budget that are on here for the roll of items. I don't know if you want to handle those in order or if you want me to sort of jump to the Board of Ed items. The Board of Ed does have two items that are on the schedule with the other city items that are the carryover items. And then we have a larger request that's listed as a separate action item, which is a request to place funds into a non-lapsing account pursuant to Connecticut General Statute 10-248A. So I don't know if you want to take the first items first, in which case you do have some city items.
Why don't we just do the Board of Ed at this point, unless there's any, unless there's a view to do the other side, to do the city side first? Since we're, speaking
Sure.
to you, now let's just do the Board of Ed and then we'll.
Okay,
come
so on page, it looks like on your agenda, it is on page 19. You'll see a carryover request, items totaling $52,457, and this was for two purchase orders that remained outstanding. And we've given you the backup documentation on those two items. Therefore, some library materials at Tracy Elementary School in the amount of $29,295 that hadn't been received. They were actually just received last week. And a second item of English language arts materials for Rowayton School in the amount of $23,161.68. And again, same thing on that. So those are the two sort of regular carryover items that are on your carryover list. And then turning attention, maybe I should stop and see if there's any questions on either of those two first, but any questions?
No.
Okay, I think we're all set with those.
Okay, and then the other larger request is explained really in my backup memo, but essentially what this is a request, and we've put in similar requests like this in the past, and the Board of Estimate has approved these in the past, but there is a section of state law under 10-248A that does allow boards of education to carry over up to 2% of any unexpended balance from the prior fiscal year with approval of the budget making authority from the city. And obviously you're the budget making authority from the city. So we are requesting authorization to permit that carryover. As I've indicated in my backup memo, there's really two components to this carryover. One is an amount of $1.5 million. And our board, at the point that they were reconciling the budget for fiscal year 2021, recognized that we were expecting that there would be a surplus of at least $1.5 million from the old fiscal year. And in reconciling that budget, we built in an assumption that the Board of Estimate would approve a carryover of 1.5 million. So the first 1.5 million is really a reconciling item in order to cover the last $1.5 million of expenses in the board's final operating budget for 2021. The second portion of this, and the larger portion of this, in the amount of $2,469,000 and change, is related to COVID-19. And as you know, COVID-19 has upended our world and upended what we need to do in order to continue to operate. And certainly that's been the case for education systems all around the country, indeed all around the world. And at the point over the summer, COVID was, becoming, more and more under control in Connecticut. The state, the Governor Lamont, and the State Department of Education put out strong guidance requesting school districts to plan to reopen to in-person learning. And certainly that's something we wanted to do as quickly as possible, because we know that students learn best when they're in the classroom, and that particularly our youngest learners and our most vulnerable learners particularly need to be in the classroom. And so Norwalk, the superintendent, developed formed a reopening task force, and that reopening task force developed the reopening plan that the district has now executed upon, and that reopening plan provides for 5 day a week in-person instruction for our elementary schools. And we're really still, I think, one of the few districts in Connecticut that moved immediately to full in-person instruction at the elementary grades, except we still also offer a remote option for parents that prefer that option for their children. But most of our elementary students are in fact coming back to in-person instruction. And then at the grades 6 through 12, we've implemented a hybrid program where students are in person part of the time and at home part of the time. And one of the big challenges, of course, in COVID-19 is maintaining adequate social distance among students and staff in our buildings. And so that's why we needed to go to a hybrid model in grades 6 through 12. And in the elementary grades, we needed to go to a model that essentially spreads our students out into what are really supplemental or auxiliary spaces within the buildings. So we've got students in cafeterias and gymnasiums and other spaces that weren't normally classrooms, so that we can provide adequate social distancing. And of course, we then also need more staffing in order to staff those auxiliary classrooms. So we've, in essence, developed a reopening plan, but obviously it does require additional resources. So the backup material I gave you has two different schedules on it. The first schedule, that's titled Reopening Expenditures, is just the reopening expenses that we are intending to charge to the carryover funds, the 2.4 million or 2.5 million of carryover funds. The following 4 pages is the entire reopening budget. Now, the Norwalk District submitted a rather ambitious funding proposal to the state back in early August. The state ultimately looked at our proposal and awarded Norwalk what was the second highest amount of funding under the Coronavirus Relief Fund grant of any school district in the state. So there's only one other school district that received a higher allocation. We also have available to us still funds under the ESSER grant, which was the federal government grant for education. And really the third leg of this funding stool is the carryover funds from the city. One of the things as we've gone through this exercise, and it has been frankly a big challenge, because every day it seems we learn new information. We learn about new things that have new rules that have come out that have an implication on potentially on costs or on the way we do business. We've also learned a bunch of new things in terms of these grant funds, because the coronavirus relief grant, for instance, can only be used for expenses that are incurred through December 31st of 2020. So originally, when we applied for that grant, we were working under the assumption that it was for the entire school year, but in October learned that no, that grant has to be fully expended by the end of December. It also is earmarked specifically for reopening expenses. On the other hand, and not things necessarily like technology. Obviously, we've had a lot of technology needs and a lot of technology expenses as well. But the items that we're funding from or allowed to fund from the coronavirus relief grant are things like the extra staffing that we needed for reopening, the PPE that we needed for reopening for staff and students, the shields and the plexiglass barriers and the air purifiers. These are all things that we are charging to the Coronavirus Relief Fund. So it's been really a bit of a jigsaw puzzle to try to put this together because, again, each of the grants have their own requirements, their own timelines of when the funds have to be spent by. But at this point, we think we've put the plan together, and there is a gap, in particularly the second half of the year. We're expecting to continue to operate through the end of the school year, and we expect we're going to still be in a COVID-19 environment, certainly come January, and we will need to maintain social distancing, and therefore we're really focusing the city carryover funds to cover expenses that we would be incurring in the second half of the school year from January to June. And so primarily what we're covering is additional paraeducators who are covering these auxiliary classrooms. We also have learning pods that have been established, particularly for our middle school students. And that we have those at various locations around the city, including in our libraries, public libraries, and other buildings, so that the purpose of the learning pods is for students who may not have adequate internet access at home, or maybe having difficulty accessing the program when they're in remote learning, or if their parents are essential workers and can't be there during the day. The learning pods provides a place for those students to go to on those days when they're not scheduled to be in the building. And again, we're finding this is particularly necessary and useful for our middle school students. And then there are other expenses related to specialized learning that are funded in here, other academic supplies, and other expenses that the state won't allow us to cover through the state grant. We are showing that there is potentially a shortfall here of 400,000, but we're not particularly worried about that for a couple of reasons. First of all, every week the situation changes, and trying to plan out what's going to happen in the spring is beginning to look a little futile. But we do know, if worse came to worse, one of the things we could do, we don't want to do this, but it would be an option to scale back on the bus monitors, or even eliminate the bus monitors if necessary, if we don't have any other way to fund them. But ultimately, I think we're going to find some other funding source. There is a possibility after the election that there could be a second round of funding from the federal government. We don't know if that's going to be the case, but that certainly would be a possibility. And again, as I said, there are so many moving pieces here. I'm comfortable that we can cover what we need to cover, so long as we have these carryover funds to help us through. So I'm going to stop there. I don't know if the superintendent or our board member, Barbara Meyer Mitchell, would like to offer any comments.
Barbara, do you want to go?
Mainly, I just want to emphasize what heroic duty Tom and his staff have done to do this Tetris game, to meet all the guidelines of the state and federal money, and just again lean into the fact that Norwalk has done an excellent job of advocating for outside funding. And we also worked very hard in the spring to work with the city to keep our costs down in the last budget cycle. So hopefully we can all agree that this is a good investment in our schools and our students going forward.
And I think, as Tom articulated, we made a concerted effort to ensure that the state carried the burden of the cost associated with COVID. And as a result, we were the second highest allotted in the state. Our request was higher than the amounts received. So that created some of the challenges, even though we scaled back on a lot of the programming structures that we were hoping to have in place to ensure that teachers had all of the necessary staffing and tools to move forward with the unique model we had to create to accommodate the social distancing within the schools. We were able to scale back, but even in scaling back, we were still short. And as a consequence, we need these additional resources to balance out the budget. But I think Tom did a thorough job of explaining the rationale behind the costs associated with some of the programming needs that we're hoping you take into consideration tonight.
Thank you, Doctor. Any questions? That was a pretty thorough review or summation, but are there any questions?
Ed,
Jim?
it's Ed Abrams. I have one question, and Henry, I'd look to you for guidance on this along with Tom. I fully support everything that's here, and it's an outstanding job by the Board of Education, and it is absolutely unprecedented times. But so that we do not get sideways with one another like we did at the beginning of this year on our planning cycle and base budgets and therefore year-to-year increases, is there a way to ring fence this so that it does not sit within what becomes the base budget for planning purposes?
I think that's what Tom did, and that's why the two smaller items were separated from the large item. Tom, maybe you want to explain?
Yes, that's correct. So these are items that actually under state law go into a separate fund. And so we were actually talking, or Kristen was talking earlier today with Chitsame about actually creating a new fund with its own number, and so that it will be separate and apart from the general fund of the Board of Education. So it won't affect the minimum budget requirement and won't affect our, when we're looking year over year from budget to budget, because these are extraordinary expenses. We don't expect them to continue. Certainly, we hope by the beginning of next school year, we're hoping that maybe COVID will be behind us, but certainly, we consider them extraordinary one-off type expenses.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
So, Tom, I had a quick question. First of all, I commend you for the amount of work that you put into this thing. It's not something that everybody sees every once in a while. This is a one-in-a-lifetime unique situation. But let me just understand that. So the Board of Ed came in under budget this year by almost 4 million, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So you're taking that 1.5 million, saying that's kind of the routine stuff that we're usually over by under by every year, but we'll spend it. It'll be spent somehow or other. The remaining 2.5 million is the result of money not being spent for any number of different reasons connected with COVID-19. Is that correct?
Not entirely, but I wouldn't say you're talking about where the surplus came from last year. Is that really what you're asking?
Yeah. So where I'm going with this is that I understand that you're telling us that you're probably going to need about $4 million, or you're going to need about $2.5 million to cover reopening expenses associated with COVID going forward, correct?
Or yes, we need it now.
Okay.
We need it this school year, the 2.5 million.
Exactly.
Yes.
But last year we had savings or we underspent by almost $2.5 million as well.
Right. So we
actually
had
almost 4 million.
Right. It was 4.1 million. So a couple things. I will say that a portion of that, and perhaps a significant portion, maybe half of it, was related to the impact of COVID last year, because COVID last year did result in the district, not spending some money that we otherwise would have spent. So some of the areas, for instance, we didn't pay didn't pay most of our spring sports stipends, and that was several $100,000. We had savings in some of our building expenses for things like electricity and heat and so on, because the buildings were shut down in the middle of March. We had some savings in some of the supply accounts because all of a sudden everyone's working remotely and some supplies and materials just didn't get purchased at that point. So we did have savings in a number of areas, and we also had positions that didn't get filled because once we were in a remote learning situation, we weren't filling vacancies or weren't replacing people for anyone who left. So we had some savings certainly in the salary accounts because of that as well. So we definitely had savings last year due to COVID, and some of it is just sort of normal uncertainty, if you will, that goes into any budget. We put together the budget.
Sorry for interrupting, but was there a large chunk of the English language money that we had put in there that was anticipated?
Yes, some of it was because some of those positions, they weren't able to get filled, and I know we were very close. I don't remember the exact numbers, but there were several positions that were supposed to literally be filled on the week of March 13th, and then we were out, and so those positions.
That's true. Some people were actually interviewed and about to be hired, and then the shutdown happened, so it didn't make sense. Another area was some PD and travel and conferences. A lot of people, obviously, they couldn't travel or hold their conferences or large gatherings, so that was a portion of it as well.
Substitute teachers, we didn't need any substitutes because teachers were, yeah. James, we actually have the finance committee of the board went through this multiple times in April, May, and June, and we can send the final accounting on to you if that would help you understand.
No, I don't want to get into the weeds on this. I'm just trying to understand, if we got $2.5 million that we have to pay for anticipated COVID expense going forward, does that mean that we are still going to face that $2.5 million that was a shortfall from last year? That's just going to add more and more to the following year.
The shortfall that I'm most concerned about is that ELL portion, when we talked about the base budget. And so I think that's where we need to have further conversation. But with regards to the sort of one-time COVID costs, in the hopes that we have a vaccine or a therapeutic that gets us to a better outcome with the virus and we can go back to school in a more normal model, the biggest expenses that we're facing, other than the one-time costs of the filters and PPE and so forth, the biggest expense is the labor of spreading out our class sizes so that we are respecting the 50% class guidance from the State Department of Education.
Okay, I don't know. You know more about that than I do. I'm not going to question on that one, but also, don't we have the overall population of the school attendees dropping as well?
But the enrollment did drop this year, but a lot of it has to do with people opting to homeschool given the COVID situation. So I look at that as more as a temporary state given the current pandemic. And I think that our numbers will be most likely go up again once we go past this pandemic. When you look at we have 136 students that in terms of enrollment that dropped. And when you look at that number, 40% of the 40 students are homeschooled right now, and 40 students are pre-K students that we don't have an instructional option that is remote for them. So all in all, most of the enrollment decline is as a result of different instructional choices that parents have made given the pandemic.
But we also didn't get the increase that we thought we were going to get.
We did.
We
So
did or we did not.
we did last year.
We did last year.
Yeah, we were already by June, our final enrollment numbers were at the place that we thought they would be in the projection for September.
But in the fall, we didn't get the increases.
Right, because people are choosing to keep their children home because they're afraid of the virus. We also have a documented with 78 students that moved from other places to Norwalk this cycle as well, including a lot of children from New York City.
Well, the net drop, I think that the superintendent is talking about the net drop was a net drop in which is all, we're not talking about a lot. You're talking about 100 some odd students was a net drop. So I'm talking about is that we anticipated a big increase with the non-English speaking people, students, and that didn't occur. Yet we also had a net drop in student population.
Well, the increase that I think Barbara was articulating happened in the 1920 academic school year. So the increase did occur. When you look at the numbers for this year, after that increase, we had a minor decline of 136 students as a result of parents selecting different instructional models for their children. But the increase in 1920 did occur. From that increase, we had a drop of 136 students.
So for next year, so for next September, we had anticipated that there was going to be a big increase in non-English speaking students. And we had added more money to the budget for that.
For the year that money was added, we had the increase, which was 1920.
And we also have refunded that funding, right, Tom?
Refunded the funding?
No.
I thought we did.
We had anticipated doing that, but in order to balance out the COVID expense, we're seeking to maintain those funds as part of the rollover.
I guess what I'm concerned about is that are we going to be looking at another $2.5 million, which is actual normal, on top of COVID reopening expense that is going to cause us to go over in our next year's budget? The budget that we're going into?
Well, we have our demographer updating our enrollment projections for next year. And as you can, I'm sure, appreciate, in the current environment, it's really hard to try to project what's going to happen. In fact, he's asked to, that we basically get together with the superintendent and some other folks and sort of talk this through a little bit, because trying to figure out while you're in the middle of COVID, what's going to happen next year is pretty tough. We know what the trend was. We know that there was this small decline and obviously a interruption of that trend, historic trend, because of COVID. But what we should plan on for next year is really going to be the question. And so we haven't settled upon that yet. I mean, I think at this point, we certainly shouldn't need to build in, anything larger than what we had been assuming, but it probably will be a little bit lower than we had a year ago. Say that the enrollment projections from June of 2019 went out several years, and it'll probably be below those numbers, I would suspect, just because of COVID-19. So I don't think you're gonna, I don't think we've got any sort of built-in, if I'm understanding your question, do we have some built-in increase here that we are looking at? And I think other than, the 1.5 million that Barbara Meyer Mitchell already referenced, I think the other piece of this, the 2,469,000, we really view as a one-time type of event. And if it isn't, then we're going to hope that the federal government continues to provide, and the state governments continue to provide additional funding to school districts to cover these extraordinary expenses.
Thank you,
But I
Tom.
think, James, you're right that we're going to need to keep our eye on the trends. I think if the economy collapses, as some people are projecting, we could see people bringing children in from private school back into public because their family can't afford the private schools anymore. We could see, a different immigration trends depending on how the election plays out. There's a lot of things up in the air right now, but I'm grateful we have really, really good demographers who have mostly been very right over the last several years.
Who's predicting a collapse of the economy?
Not me.
News to me, but
Yeah.
I hope not. Yeah, is there any other question?
Last month, Henry said we were doing well.
No, the national economy, I assume you're referring to, right?
Yes.
Who cares about them? No, thank you very much. Now, I'm not trying to insinuate anything there. I just wanted to really understand what the numbers were all about. And I think, Tom, you're doing a great job, and it's a incredibly difficult situation. And I just commend you for doing such a good job.
Okay, thank you.
Let me say, this is Sherry. Let me say, I kind of feel like with a school budget, certainly given the climate that we're in now, that we should be open to the fact that the budget may be different, whether that means an increase or not, only because unlike the city budget, a school budget, the children coming in and out, it's a little bit more transient than a city budget. So I kind of feel like the numbers can be reflective of that. And certainly with this pandemic, my sense is that, we may need to be prepared for the expectation that there may be an increase.
Well, I think from what Tom is saying is that he pretty much has it covered.
Right.
And if anything, maybe we'll if everything goes great and starting February 1st, all the kids are back to school and we're all doing well, we'll just cruise right through this and maybe even have a little bit of money left over at the end of the year.
But I think what Tom is saying is that he's under by $400,000 that he's confident he can make up in some way, but it's anyone's guess, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the number says we're short by 400, but I feel confident that we can cover that. I don't anticipate us coming back for a special appropriation for the remainder of this year. I don't see anything on the horizon that would suggest that would be necessary. Obviously, something new happens and throws you for a loop, then everything can be out the window. But right now, I don't see that that should be necessary.
All right, I'd like to move on. I'd just like to commend Dr. Estrella and her team, Tom and the Board of Ed for doing such a great job on the fly to put this academic year together, the year together in light of COVID, and to get as much money as they got from the state, and to have enough money left over, hopefully, to be able to carry you through until at least the end of the school year. So I just want to commend all of you for doing such a great job in connection with this. The item on the table at the moment is the action that's requested of us is pursuant to Connecticut General Statutes 10-248A, approve the Board of Education's request to deposit $3,969,827 of the Board of Education's unexpended balance from fiscal year 2019-20 to a non-lapsing account consisting of $1.5 million to support the reconciled fiscal year 2020-21 operating budget, and $2,469,827 to support extraordinary COVID-19 reopening expenses. That's the one item, and then the other item was I'm not sure if we approved that, the $50,000 plus dollars. The $52,457, has that been approved? I'm not sure we voted on that.
I don't think so.
Okay, so
I think, Mr. Chairman, I think that we would probably end up voting on the rollover altogether, perhaps, and vote on this item separately.
Okay, all right. So
I will move this item.
Okay, thank you.
The item I'll move the,
And the item being the
action, yeah.
3969? Yeah, okay. So the mayor has moved the item. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Abstentions? No abstentions. The item carries unanimously. And the rollover is approved. Shall we then vote on the 52,457, which is for these outstanding invoices? Do we need
So
to vote?
moved.
I'd like to share my screen and go through all of the rollovers
Okay,
together.
Sure.
Am I able to, let me see if I'm able to share. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
The first department is Operations and Public Works. The first few, I want to say most of these rollovers are going to be related to COVID items, that there's a backlog of work that needs to be done because of the shutdown. The first item is DPW's Bartlett Tree Services of trees that were marked and the date the work was delayed due to COVID. That's $24,185. The second item, $22,000, is for yard waste and construction material disposal. There will be a backlog of those disposal services as well. The third item, $196,929, is the engineering department has several vacancies. They're understaffed and there's a backlog of work due to COVID in that department. They won't be able to provide these services without this surplus rollover. The next one is temporary wages, $10,000. They will rely on interns to do a lot of the functions that are not getting done because they've delayed their junior engineering hiring. Other professional services, $15,000. This was also hazardous waste collection that was postponed due to COVID-19 shutdown, and they'll have future collection events. The next, building management items, Alan Lowe touched on this. There's a $221,000 surplus in the building's maintenance budget for 98 South Main Street. This will be two separate actions. 70,000 of that will be transferred to the buildings and renovations account to continue the phased office improvement plan. The remainder, $151,000 surplus, $125,000 of that will roll over to continue the maintenance on the 98 South Main Street building. Their total surplus is $701,077. They're requesting to roll over $393,114. And I think Anthony Carr and Alan Lowe, I think, is still on the line if you have questions.
I have no questions.
Okay, the next section is economic and community development. A lot of these were small amounts that were just delayed, again, delays because of COVID-19. The $4,175 was for vouchers for delayed shipments of items that were appropriated in fiscal year 2020, but paid for in 21 because of the delay. So they'd like to roll that over. The next, $40,183. There was an impact study for the Walk Bridge project that was delayed that they would like to continue in this fiscal year. $160 they'd like to roll over for a deficit in their Telesco minutes budget. $3,426 for the Arts Commission for a contract that was approved in the winter, which was also delayed because of COVID. There was a project for the Arts Commission to for a hanging system in the Mayor's Gallery that they would like to roll over so that they can continue that project. $77,372 for business development for the Small Business and Main Street program that was released in 2019. This is also due to COVID delays. Economic and Community Development, the Planning and Zoning Department has $100,000 surplus they'd like to roll over for a project that they began work on, but it was delayed because of the East Norwalk TOD plan. The final item for economic community development is $12,845 for code enforcement. They had contracted with various vendors for the neighborhood improvement, but also because of delays, they need to roll these funds over so they can continue that work in 2021. So their total.
Angela, can I just ask?
Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, sure.
You know, I see that there's money or being rolled over, excuse me, to pay for projects that were not or were delayed because of COVID-21 or COVID-19. Sorry. Are we going to have enough people to do this work? I can understand if we're going out to contractors to spend the money to get some of this work done. But in some cases on public works, for example, are we going to have the number of people that are available to do the work or to supervise the work that's now kind of doubled up? Because certainly we're not going to do it right away. We're going to probably wait until COVID gives us the green light to do it. Is that?
Anthony may be able to speak to that if you're asking specifically about DPW. I know they're
not specifically for DPW, but for all of them for that matter.
Yeah.
I mean, it's in some cases it's a lot of money, and I assume that there's somebody there's some personnel in City Hall that are looking at these things that have to supervise them. Do we have the manpower to supervise? This is all additional work for everybody in City Hall.
Right. Anthony, are you still on the call?
Yes. Hi, Angela.
Hi.
I'm here. Yes. So as part of the retirement vacancies and some resignations that we've had in the engineering department specifically, and also operations and parks and recreation, we have worked with the director of personnel, chief of staff, and the CFO, who's currently on the line, in conjunction with the mayor, and most of the positions that we have lost due to retirement and or resignations will be reinstated. So workload and resources and workload management is not a concern.
Yeah, but now we're going to spend more money.
I thought the question was specific about the personnel.
Well, the personnel, but the personnel costs money. And my point was, if we didn't have the personnel to do the work, then we have to go out and hire more people to do the work. So these numbers include additional expense for the people that we have to hire to supervise to do these jobs that never got done in COVID-19.
Well, specifically the items that were on the DPW agenda, the Bartlett tree and the tree service contract, I believe was the first line. Then there was the hazardous household waste contract, and then I believe there's a third contractual cost in there too for the solid yard waste disposal. That's still going to be, that's work that was just translated over to the right due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So the work still needs to get done. We're still going to have the same people in place to do the same work. It just got shifted over to the right in time. And then for engineering, the two engineering items that are on there for the interns and also for the on-call services contracts. Those on-call services contracts, one is for surveying and the second on-call contract is for miscellaneous engineering support. So that's still work that we have not yet even to identify that we know we're going to need to do with the same staff that we had before, if that makes any sense.
But you had people, but you would have had things that are supposed to be done this year that you would need people to do those things. Now you're just adding on to their workload.
Well, or it's the same, or it could be the same
people,
work, right?
but you're
Right,
just
same
you're saying,
people.
hey, wait a minute, we didn't do any of this stuff in last year up through December. Now we have to do all of it again. So not again, but we now have to do what we didn't do 2 months ago, 3 months ago, 4 months ago.
No, understood. And that's why I meet with my department heads every week, and we have workload resource leveling meetings, and we schedule the work as appropriate. So now we just have extra work. That's correct, and we'll get as much as we can done.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm not. I follow your question.
No, I understand what you're saying. I just think that, you're going to be pushing your people very hard to do a lot more work than if you didn't do work for 4 months and now all of a sudden you tell everybody that they've got to do more, and they're going to say, well, we don't have the people to do it. We have to go out and hire temporaries to do it. It's going to cost us more money. If you can get around that, that's great. And I'm happy to hear that you can manage it. You're gonna just have to lengthen that whip a little bit and do a good job.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that we've considered too is with the capital budget coming up and a lot of the other things that we have, we'll have to probably refocus some of the priorities. So maybe things that were priority 1 this year have to go down to priority 2, right? So you only have X amount of people in my work, right, to get Z level of service. So one of those variables need to change.
Okay, so that's the answer I'm looking for.
Right,
I think that's the answer I'm looking for, is you're going to reprioritize things. And there are things that were scheduled to do this year that are not going to get done. They're going to be done next year or the year after that.
Or we would hire consultants to oversee paving inspections or oversee engineering inspections, and we would just have to manage the consultants versus managing the work directly.
Yeah, but that's going to cost more money.
James, I would point out that a lot of these additional items are on line items for external services, other contractual services, professional services, so that it might be a case where we have outsiders doing it and we may have to have supervision, but they're already being supervised with the stuff that they're doing. So we're just coordinating more of their work to catch up on some of the things that didn't get done through COVID.
Yeah, I can see that in a couple of cases. You're right, where you've got a flexible engineering contract you're going to call in extra engineers as you need them. Yes, I agree with that. But there are some other things that are going to cost more if you want to get them all done. So the answer is that you're not going to get them all done, and it's going to be pushed back. I can live with that.
And then those monies would eventually fall back into the fund balance if they're not expended. Is that what you're?
No. What do you mean? Why would they fall back into the fund balance? It's work that's not going to be done, but we're still going to spend the money because we're taking it from last year. Again, we want to make sure that we stay within our budget. Anything that goes in, if we take more money in, and I keep saying this, that the more money we take in through increased budgets is more taxes that we're giving to the public. We're charging the public. That's not what we want to be. We want to make sure that we.
But these are dollars that are being rolled over. These are dollars that are being rolled over that were not.
Ed, we've collected the money from the people of the city, okay? Right. And we said this is what we're going to spend. If we spend more money, that means that we got to collect more money from the city, from the residents of the city.
Right, but we're not.
The fact that we can roll it over means that we collected too much money in the first place.
Well,
this is a unique situation.
Jim, we're rolling it over because they were not spent because of COVID. So it's not as if the money was allocated and it was more than what was needed absent COVID. At least that's my understanding.
Yeah, the money was not spent because of reduced staffing to keep the workers safe. So we would be 50% of the workforce on, 50% off.
Exactly.
And other types of situations where they couldn't get the work done because of those kinds of things. And a lot of the money that you're looking at right now will be used for professional services. That the only issue for the DPW workers or for the inspectors to have to monitor those services to make sure that the work is being done properly.
And I understand that, okay? And my point is that if we have to spend more money to get all of this work done, then that's added expense. And I don't want to see that we have to incur any added expense. And I certainly agree that if we've got some contractual engineers that we can bring in, that's not going to cost us any more money. We're only going to spend whatever we have in the budget. Fine, that's great.
I would just point out that when we perform this review, one of the key questions we asked was, well, if you didn't do it last year, you already have a budget for this year. Why do you need the rollover?
Exactly.
So oftentimes, the ones where they didn't need a rollover are not in this list, and we screen them out. The ones that are here was a delay because by not doing it last year, we still have to do that additional work. It's not like we can catch up. So we went through that process with every single department and saying, tell me why this year's budget wouldn't cover the expenses that you have to occur.
And that's why the DPW was had a surplus of approximately $300,000 over and above what they really needed to, with the rollover that they're asking us. Is that correct?
Right. I think the concept is last year's budget was accurate. And if everything went along without COVID, they would have spent the money and would have performed those services. Some of those services got delayed, and some of those services will never have to be done because of the timing. It'll just be next year you go through your regular budget. The ones that will not have to be done are true savings, will go into the fund balance. The ones where there's a delay, Anthony and the other chiefs are asking for rollovers so that the budget pays for those activities, and it's just a timing shift.
And I agree with that. Okay. My only question was, when we got into this thing, was, do we have enough money to supervise and enough personnel to make these rollovers happen? Because it seems to me that it could cost us a lot more money than what we are rolling over in the budget anyway. But I don't mean to belabor it. I'm sorry. Let's go on.
Okay, so where were we when we left off here?
The total for economic and community development is $242,840 out of their $308,366. Do you want to ask any more questions for, I think Jessica may be on the line if you have questions about specific items.
No questions from me, thank you.
Okay. The next item is the tax collector. These are all related to the delayed tax sale. The total is $60,000 out of a surplus of $76,762. Henry, do you want to speak to the finance departments, or do you want me to go ahead?
You could keep going until there are questions.
Okay. The IT department is the next finance department. And I think Karen is on the line because I may not know what these technical terms are. I'm not sure what 30 watts delayed project due to the office moves, but there's $9,900 for that. And a delayed next gen repair, $1,200. Delayed training, $6,000. Miscellaneous kiosk expenses, $1,000. Credit card bills, $2,482. ESRI website, $15,000, and again another training item for $1,500. A total of $37,082 out of a $62,860 surplus. Purchasing, this is a new contract with Canon Solutions that was higher than anticipated. So purchasing would like to roll over this amount to cover that deficit in 2021 at $4,930. Now we move on to recreation and parks. This is also Anthony Carr's department, and Nick Roberts is the head of recreation and parks. $32,142 for overtime. That was increased expenses due to COVID and storms. $16,874 for 12 full-time staff that are retiring and will be covered by part-time staff in the interim. $17,862 to cover negative balance in the park improvements account. $10,028 to repair courts and playgrounds. $1,819 for uniforms, $5,734 for repairs of the play equipment, 2,534 for also a negative balance in the current fiscal year, 5,368 for roof and window repair at the mansion. And that total is $92,361 on an equal amount of surplus for that department. Any questions? Now, the police department only had two important items that they wanted rolled over. First, $114,899 surplus for training that was canceled. They'd like to roll over $60,000 of that. And other professional services, they'd like to roll over the entire surplus of $30,000 for the Marine Unit Relocation Study. Any questions? For the fire department, this is another situation where I'm transferring between two accounts. They would like to take the $30,000 surplus in wages part-time, transfer $10,000 of that to another department, wages part-time, and the org number 013152, and also roll over the remainder to part-time wages. The next is human resources. The $36,724 that was for, so that the human resource department can have more oversight over the contractual limits of the tuition reimbursement and the employment contracts. There is a limit per bargaining unit, and allocating all that funds to HR will give them more oversight on those limits. And they'd like to roll over $7,000 for their employee wellness program. The health department, the security guard that was encumbered last year, that was a transfer from contingency, and they are now hiring that security guard for the health department. Also, other machinery and equipment, they'd like to roll over $6,500 to complete the rain gauge project. My department, I was delayed in getting the budget book printed, so I will have to pay for 2 budget books to get printed this year because that project fell into 2021 for the prior year budget. Tax assessor is requesting $45,000 for the price increase for vision services. Legislative, they'd like $1,600 in delayed training. And in grants, this was a special appropriation that was approved by the BET and the Common Council last year for the project that Alan Lowe spoke to with the YMCA moving to 98 South Main Street, because that was delayed. They have not drawn that $1 million special appropriation, so that will happen in the 2021 budget year. And the final item is the $52,457 for the Board of Ed that Tom spoke to earlier. The total rollover out of a $6.9 million surplus is $2.125 million.
Let's make sure everyone understands. 2.1 million has to be added to the 4 million special that the Board of Ed requested into a special account. And that's why we're rolling over 6.1 million out of 6.9 million. So on the city side, we have a surplus of 2.8 million, of which we are requesting 2 million be rolled over. And if you take out the 1 million for the YMCA matching grant that was already approved, we're looking at a $1.8 million surplus and a request to roll over 1 million. So again, the concept is if they manage well and they can use the funds this year, but it's mostly because of timing differences. That's why we agreed to the request.
And Henry, on the city side, roughly $700,000, et cetera, will be rolled into the fund balance. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Although I guess I should point out that with last year's budget, if you recall, we budgeted where expenses would be greater than revenues by $6 million. and we anticipated drawing down the unreserved fund balance to fund that gap. That's where this $6 million is coming from. So it's not sort of an addition, it's sort of a drawdown of that fund balance that we had originally anticipated in the budget. And we will not require 700,000 of that 6 million after all these rollovers.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. I understand that the fund balance drawdown is just now smaller by roughly $700,000.
Right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Any other questions? Is there a motion to approve the rollovers as was just explained?
So moved.
Been moved. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The motion carries and the rollovers are approved.
Thank you.
And I believe that, is there anything else on the agenda of note? There's the Oak Hills financial reports. I understand that there was a pretty detailed report last meeting, the October 5th meeting, and it seems like Oak Hills is doing well, and they're not going to, they're hoping not to have to rely on the line of credit going forward, is my understanding. So is there anything else in the packet of note that they've attached to this for purposes of this meeting?
No, that was it.
Okay. All right. Is there anything else? Nope. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Jim moves it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, staff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.